What about specifics? Let's talk a little bit about specifics. Like Jay, for example, you mentioned to me once about how you work on better feedback. Can you talk a little about that in the product context?
Absolutely. So better feedback, I think, is really important because a lot of times in many places, right? Ultimately, ideally, I will say the goal is we have really good feedback from our users, right? We understand our customers really well. We understand our users really well, and we're making, customer centered product, user centered products, right? We're really deep diving and wanting to understand our users and how they feel about the things that we're producing. But what is that feedback loop? Right? How often are you checking in with your customers? How often can you get feedback about your users' behavior and interaction without having to do a formal survey, right? Or waiting for someone to text back? What are the built-in mechanisms that you're putting into your user's journey or into your customer's journey to say, okay, when they do this thing, we can tell it's a reflection or it's indicative of this, right? Or when we do this thing, it's an indication of that. I think when it comes to product, a lot of times when we talk about better metrics, sometimes it's even deciding on what the metrics are that are actually reflective of whether or not what we're doing is effective, right? So we can say like, oh, we sold 10,000 units of this thing, right? But how are people using the thing? You know what I mean? Is it actually yeah, like it was up 10,000 products. And that's not this, and it might be a great product, but you also may just have a really great marketing sales team, right? You may have great
Right.
marketing and it's
Right.
really and are just great at putting it in people's hands, but they're not staying customers, they're not lasting customers, they're not returning customers. And so even just deciding on what the metrics are, and a lot of times, we've seen it, you fudge the metrics a little bit because you don't want to, you fudge the metrics a little bit. You measure things because it's convenient and because it looks good. The numbers look good on the slide. But realistically, when we're talking about long-term down the line, what are the values that your customer holds? What are the values that your users hold, right? That you are trying to fulfill, right? Or that you are trying to meet and align with? And what are the things that you can actually measure that are a reflection of those things, right? And
Yeah.
so I think when it comes to product, those metrics sometimes get a little sticky and those conversations can get a little bit hard because sometimes it's not as tangible as a sale, right?
Mhm.
How do
Yes.
you, if you software, have you built in to know, how often your user uses your product? How do you know how often they're staying on the product? Are you tracking that in an automated way without just having to send out, or add a feedback link at the bottom that they may or may not click, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
so from a product perspective, I think that's really important. And a lot of times those conversations can be uncomfortable, right? Because you can say, hey, we built this great thing that we think is fantastic, but maybe it missed the mark a little bit. Maybe
Mhm.
some priorities that you thought were your customer held weren't necessarily priorities for your customer. And the reality is that something else was.
Right.
Um,
Right.
are you open enough? And this is where conversation comes in when it comes to like management and leadership. Are you creating an environment where your customers can say, where your teams can say, and your employees can say, hey, this is the hypothesis that we had about what our customer would value. This is the result of that, right? We didn't hit that mark, right? We didn't hit the target that we wanted to hit. But what we did learn is this. And based
Right.
on what we learned, this is what we want to do next. Are you creating that environment where people are comfortable to say, hey, we tried something and it didn't work, but we learned and we know how to implement our learnings? Or are you creating an environment where you have to get it right the